Greetings from Stanford University. I'm Bill Barnett, professor at the Stanford Doors School of Sustainability and the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
I'm Ingrid Ackermann, an undergrad in the School of Engineering.
And we have with us here today Professor George Hilley from the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at the Stanford Doors School of Sustainability. And George and his colleagues just ran a conference on new technology-enabled discoveries to understand Earth's seafloor for hazards and sustainability. And Ingrid, you were there. What did you see as some of the highlights of the conference?
Oh, this was a very intriguing conference as someone very interested in ocean science. I particularly enjoyed the new technology that was discussed using fiber optic cables on the seafloor. And so if I can get us started, George, do you mind giving us an introduction to the seafloor? What's there? What are some of these hazards mentioned and some opportunities there?
Sure. Well, thanks first of all to you two, Bill and Ingrid, for having me on and inviting me to be part of your podcast. So just to go through why the seafloor itself and understanding the seafloor is important, why it is important and why we want to study it and understand it more. First of all, it is a place where, first of all, our ability to actually image and see the seafloor is really, it's not well resolved compared to many other parts of the Earth. In fact, there's always this joke in Earth and planetary sciences that we have a better view of the surface of Mars than we do the surface of the bottom or the bottom surface of our oceans. And so just from a pure exploration standpoint and discovery-based standpoint, I think studying Earth's seafloor is really one of these vast areas of exploration that, is something that we're very interested in. In addition, there are practical reasons for caring about why or understanding what goes on along Earth's seafloor. From the standpoint of an Earth scientist, of which I am, the seafloor hosts features that often are responsible for generating the largest earthquakes on the planet. And being able to actually understand those types of events, including potentially even precursory motions that might be associated with the buildup to large events, requires us to be able to go into these very inaccessible areas, to instrument them, and to actually see these and understand and study these precursors if they do in fact exist. We've been really hampered in our ability to understand these types of large earthquakes by the fact that we have really not been able to get close to them because of our inability to actually properly instrument the seafloor. And that's all changing now because there's a lot of new technologies that are in play to be able to measure these subtle changes in the seafloor, the types of signals that could be observed near these types of earthquake generating faults that allow us to really, study those types of processes in ways that we never have been able to before. Also, from a very practical standpoint, from the standpoint of green energy, I think it's very important, and the modern world of telecommunications, studying Earth's seafloor is very important because, first of all, that's the most important way in which we actually get data across the ocean is through seafloor fiber optic cables. And being able to understand what might jeopardize those types of cables is very important for our telecommunications infrastructure. Those have to do with the processes and operation across Earth's seafloor. Additionally, one of the important components of a green energy infrastructure is going to be renewable resources such as offshore wind. That's going to require a lot of infrastructure on the seafloor in order to both get data back about the offshore wind farms as well as transmit power. And those are all going to be susceptible to damages caused by seafloor processes. So the better we can understand those processes, the better we can cite the specific infrastructure that's going to be necessary in order for us to achieve our green energy goals.
Thank you for diving into the importance. A question I have for you is regarding where we are currently. So maybe 200 or 300 years ago, scientists and voyagers back in the day were taking weighted ropes and dropping them down to the bottom of the seafloor to create these maps of what they could discern about the bottom of the ocean. But now today we're at this sort of explosion of technology. And there's so many different things going on in the industry. Could you enlighten us about a few of those? How far have we come?
Oh, we've come a long way from the early days for sure. There's a number of key technologies, I think, in terms of actually understanding and imaging the shape of Earth's seafloor, which is very important. The first of which is, you can think of it kind of in two categories. One, well, even three. One, what we can see from satellites. One, what we can see from another, what we can see from ships, and yet another, what we can see from submersible vehicles. And really, the modern innovations have to do with our ability to, first of all, from ship-based observations, be able to image Earth's seafloor at much higher resolutions than we have been because of developments in sonar, high-resolution sonar on ships. But really, the technology that's allowed us to really get these high-resolution depictions of Earth's seafloor have been these autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs. And these vehicles are really quite amazing in their construction. So they're basically these little torpedoes that you can launch off of ships. They're completely self-guided and autonomous throughout their mapping mission. And they can basically fly above the seafloor surface, and actually image with high-resolution sonar in great detail the ocean bottom geometry, as well as collect other types of data as well. And so what that's allowed us to do, I think, is really to image Earth's seafloor at, for instance, the same types of resolutions that we've now been able to achieve on land by laser altimetry, on the order of a meter resolution. So we can get this very high resolution depiction of the seafloor, which really allows us to see processes that sculpt and hazards that influence infrastructure on the ocean bottom at the scale at which they occur. This is, again, just for background, but my work is on the shape of Earth's surface and how that reflects the hazards and processes. My work has been almost, but recently, until about 5 years ago, my work has been almost entirely on land, because those were the areas in which we could obtain the requisite data to actually perform those types of studies.
Interesting.
Okay, and with these, there's a whole other community with WHOI that have basically, it's a marine geophysics, marine science community, and the types of studies that the on-land hazards geomorphologists do are very different, because they try to capture the signature and landscapes of these processes in action. Because ship-based data cannot actually achieve those resolutions, relating the individual processes and the action of those processes to features on Earth's surface before even the 1990s was very difficult. Since the 1990s, technological innovation in the field of laser altimetry, airborne laser altimetry, has really allowed us to make the link between what you actually see in the landscape and the hazard, the events that occur. And now, with the new technologies in the seafloor, we're actually starting to be able to do a similar type of, there's an explosion of similar types of studies where you can begin to actually see the hazards at the scale that they occur, so that you can actually study them, for the actual events themselves. And that's been enabled by this new imaging technology.
Do you mind defining laser altimetry?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the airborne laser altimetry that we've used on land is basically using laser pulses that are emitted at the ground and then are scattered back towards or reflected back towards a receiver. And what you're basically doing is just measuring the delay between the beginning of the laser pulse and its receipt back at a plane. And when you couple that with high precision GPS navigation and inertial measurement unit, inertial navigation, you can actually get a very high resolution picture with very high frequency laser scanners as to what the surface of Earth actually looks like, on the order of less than a meter.
And you can do that under the sea now as well?
It's a slightly different technology, although there are some outfits that we saw at the conference that are using some form of LiDAR, laser ranging, in order to actually image very high resolution portions of the seafloor. The areas in which you can do that right now are pretty restricted. But the technologies that are used in the for imaging the seafloor are things like acoustic methods.
I see.
So I'm curious as to who the players are right now in this undersea world of exploration. Do you mind discussing how it has changed in recent years?
Yeah. So the main people that I tend to work with are located down in Monterey Bay at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. It's a really interesting place because it's a combination of science and technology, and engineering. And so they are supported by the Packard Foundation mostly in order to develop new technologies for understanding Earth's oceans in general, which includes the seafloor. And though they pair the engineers with science staff as well, so that the scientists and engineers are working in tandem to both develop the new technologies, produce the data, and then be able to have this kind of cycle in which the new technology needs are communicated to the engineers and new discoveries can be made by the scientists in this iteration.
Fascinating. But more broadly, if we kind of scale out here, how much of this discovery and exploration is taking place in academia and perhaps by governments versus by private sector industry corporations?
So there is a great need, and has been a great need, for these types of imaging technologies, especially for seeding offshore infrastructure. Those include, for instance, fiber optic telecommunication cables. When you're actually going to spend a lot of money laying a cable, you need to know what the hazards are that are faced by those cables, pipelines, or whatever it is that you need to put on the seafloor, as well as the how reliable is the substrate in which you're going to embed that infrastructure. And so these types of technologies can actually give you really good information on both of those, and are key to, I think, really our telecommunications system, as well as future opportunities in green energy infrastructure that's located offshore.
That's interesting. And as I'm hearing you talk, George, I am thinking back over the various podcasts that Ingrid and I have done this year, and so many of the conferences featured a focus on climate change. Obviously, those are massive issues across all academia. And how do those topics come up for your field and for its work? And was any of that featured at the conference?
Yes. So in terms of the specific applications towards climate and sustainability applications at the conference, I think that there are many. First of all, one of the important aspects of our changing climate is the fact that it is going to cause people to migrate into different areas that may face greater exposure to natural hazards in general. One of the issues that we face, for instance, in my field, in which we're trying to understand natural hazards that could be caused by, for instance, earthquakes, is that our ability to actually characterize and understand how much of a hazard there might be really depends on our ability to see those types of structures. We can do that on land because we have direct observation. We can walk those, walk the areas. We have satellites that can image those features. We have airborne laser altimetry in which we can actually very well characterize and locate areas for further investigation. In the offshore, on the other hand, these areas, because of their poor imaging, really have a whole host of hidden hazards out there. And even if you just look at a map of where faults might be, you can see there's a very high density of faults that we know about on land, and that density decreases quite rapidly as you move across the coastline. One might wonder as to whether or not that exists just because we can't see them.
Yeah.
And so our ability to actually image these areas with this new technology really allows us to characterize the hazard much better. And that will definitely help us to understand how different populations, as they have to migrate into different areas, may face more risk in that regard.
Oh, interesting.
And perhaps as a final wrap-up question, George, what it was maybe one of your favorite takeaways or the most interesting things that you learned at the conference?
One of the most exciting aspects of the conference that I found were actually two. First of all, the use of this high-resolution bathymetry to help us seat green energy infrastructure was really exciting to me. And the reason is because while we have many aspirations as to how we're going to actually deploy in an abstract sense this green energy infrastructure, we still have to have the ability to site it properly in a way that's going to be resilient to processes over time. And so to see that application, I thought was very exciting. Along those lines, the other aspect that I found particularly exciting is the entry of really scale to collecting these types of measurements that is now starting to be provided by commercial outfits that basically have developed a range of technologies, very exciting technologies, to be able to really start to collect some of these data at a scale that is appropriate for siting large amounts of offshore infrastructure for instance, green energy applications. For instance, some of the companies that were there were basically developing ships in order to deploy fleets of these autonomous underwater vehicles. And these ships were basically lightly crewed with only a couple of people on them and telemetered back to offices via Starlink, in which all of the operations were carried out remotely. And this increases uptime of the ship's operations. It reduces cost because of these lightly crewed vessels. They have a fleet of basically these somewhat robotic ships out there that can basically measure seafloor with fleets of AUVs 24/7, which is really going to make it possible to take what have previously been kind of small footprint observations and scale them up to much larger areas where we can actually see a range of these processes going on and be able to characterize, for instance, an entire wind farm field in order to actually put in the infrastructure properly. And so this kind of scaling up of the data footprint and scaling down of the cost is really going to be, I think, revolutionary.
For our audience, I mean, they're as background, I know that many of those who do research on alternative energies will talk about the feasibility of an energy in terms of the amount of space that it is required for it to operate. And obviously for wind, typically we think of that space as being very large compared to the amount of power that's created. Well, George, it sounds like the kinds of technologies you're talking about open up the vast space of the ocean for additional exploitation of wind energy that might not have been feasible if we couldn't site those facilities.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, George Hilley, thank you so much for joining us today. And Ingrid, thank you.
Well, thanks, Bill, and thanks, Ingrid, again.
And to all of you listening, until next time. The Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability podcast series is sponsored by the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Door School of Sustainability. Music by Charged Particles. That's Caleb Hutzler, Mike Rock, and John Krosnick.